Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. NFC South, the home of your reigning Super Bowl champions, the topic on the docket for today. I am Todd Furman, joined as always by Payne Insider, and this is the perfect time to remind you to go to FanDuel.com/bettheboard. All new user signups eligible for a $1,000 free bet. Go in there, enter all of your information, make your first bet. If you happen to lose, you'll have $1,000 in your account within 72 hours. Take full advantage as you look to build your bankroll for this upcoming football season. And Payne, last time we left you on Thursday, you were a little under the weather. Are you still on the mend, my friend? And can I set the over-under at overall health at about 67.5%?
Surviving. That's where we're at right now. Surviving. Better than Thursday. Still not 100% yet.
All right. Well,
I would say 67.5% is a good number.
The way I look at it, I mean, you go around the National Football League and you see a lot of marquee players, whether it's, the receiving corps for the Ravens, A.J. Brown, Carson Wentz. None of these guys are 100% Payne. They're waiting to pace themselves for the start of the season, and I imagine your health regimen is no different.
This was not the right pace that I was looking to start the season with. That is for sure.
All right, too many reps in the preseason, but we inch closer. Only three divisions, by my count, left to go. And as we said, the NFC South. But do want to remind folks, or if you want to do it for the contest, we're approaching 1,200 entries, well ahead of last year's pace. Can you share that URL with our listeners?
BetTheBoardContest.com. It's the $6,000 NFL Pick 5 free roll. 100% free to join. No reason not to. BetTheBoardContest.com. Sign up.
Perfect. Get in there. Get your entry set up so you don't forget about it in everything that's going on in the build-up to the regular season as we inch ever so close to the Thursday night opener between the Dallas Cowboys and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. As we've done all season or preseason long as we break down these divisions, we'll run things through in alphabetical order. So if those folks waiting, trying to hear what we have to say about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you'll have to wait till later in the show. So we'll start things off with the Atlanta Falcons, who find themselves as 7-1 underdogs at FanDuel Sportsbook to emerge atop the heap in the NFC South. Their win total sits at 7.5. You do have to lay a price of $1.35 to go under. When you look at the Falcons, 4 wins a season ago was the fewest by the organization since 2013. Of course, it prompted a coaching change, one that I believe Payne should have happened significantly sooner than it did. In comes Arthur Smith taking over for Dan Quinn. You look at the Falcons, though, right now, they've put together 3 straight losing seasons for the first time since the 99 to 2001 season. And you dig into some of the numbers for the Falcons, they're not pretty. Tough luck is definitely a part of it when you goes into blowing 2 straight 15-point fourth quarter leads. No team in NFL history had blown 2 15-point fourth quarter leads over an entire season before the Falcons did it in a span of 2 weeks. Falcons just 1-8 in games decided by 7 or fewer points. Most losses and worst record in the NFL in 7-point games. And their point differential, though, of -18 may promise a little bit of optimism, indicating they should have won about 7.5 games, a 3.5 game improvement Pythag-wise. So, Payne, when you look at the coaching change, Arthur Smith comes in for a team driven by its offense, no Julio Jones. Were you at all surprised either by the hire or the fact that the Falcons elected to keep Matt Ryan as he rides into the twilight of his career?
I was not shocked by the hire. And it's all about relationships. You know that. And so I think, one, Arthur Smith was certainly deserving of interviews, and he interviewed probably pretty well. You know his father and where he makes his money, and his father is very good friends with Arthur Blank, so that's how some of this does transpire, although he was really worthy. I mean, he took a Titans offense that people thought was kind of pieced together and turned him into one of the very best offenses in the league. And I think that's probably the best place to start because, well, I think there'll be some differences. For the most part, what Arthur Smith's offense looked like in Tennessee, that's how things will look like in Atlanta. I mean, it's going to be a wide zone run scheme with lots of play action and motion. If you look at the Titans, top 5 in both play action and motion rates last season. And so I think those 3 things should really excite Matt Ryan because it's very similar to Kyle Shanahan's system, and that's where Matt Ryan performed his best. And you think about these adjustments, and right away it's probably going to help an Atlanta run game that was 29th in rushing efficiency, because the things that the wide zone run system can do for a team in a running back is pretty staggering. You know, it makes average backs look good and good backs elite. And we kind of seen that in San Francisco. It just doesn't seem to matter who they have back there. Those running backs do very well. I think the adjustments also are going to help an offensive line that got Matt Ryan slaughtered last year. I mean, he was pressured on 34% of his dropbacks. I also think it's going to increase Matt Ryan's play action rate. I would guess you're going to see conservatively like a 10% year over year increase in play action. And I think that's really important because Ryan had an adjusted accuracy rate of 84% when throwing with play action. Only Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers were more accurate with play action. So I think all of the numbers that we've seen Matt Ryan achieve, not just last year, but throughout his career, are substantially better with play action. You know, from big time throws to passer rating, you name it. And you look at him, and he's kind of been cast to the side. And how you kind of formed your question regarding Matt Ryan is interesting. Like, he's only 36. I think he is far from done. And if you've looked at his body this offseason, I mean, he is in tip-top shape. And my feeling is, even with Julio gone, we're looking at Matt Ryan probably grading out a top 10 quarterback this season with all of Arthur Smith's adjustments and changes. The big question offensively is the O-line. Who's going to replace Alex Mack? He's been the second best center in football the last 5 seasons. The rumor is they've hit a home run with Drew Dahlman, who fits their new zone scheme pretty well. And then you have, you know, young guys like Jalen Mayfield who have to step up, and Caleb McGarry has to continue his improvement. But, you know, you're looking at a group that was just average in pass rush win rate and bottom 5 and run block win rate last year with the second best center in the league. So on paper, this is a worst O-line. And the schedule of pass rushing defensive lines that Atlanta faces project to be top 10. So that's pretty scary. So the only way we really see Atlanta's O-line improve is if multiple guys get better simultaneously and have their best seasons, and the scheme fit kind of, you know, helps lift a unit that's not great. But right now, I would guess Atlanta has a bottom 10 O-line. The other obvious question is wide receiver, and you mentioned Julio Jones gone. That's the obvious thing, and it scares me when you keep hearing how much Tajae Sharpe is impressing the staff, and he's flying up the depth chart. That does make me nervous. And, you know, you're going to need, you know, a year 3 leap from Zacchaeus. And, you know, he's had 2 really good seasons, maybe an expanded role in year 3. He has an official breakout. I would expect fewer receivers on the field this year, though. You know, Arthur Smith's going to use far more 2 tight end sets. I believe Kevin Stefanski was the only coach to use more 2 tight end sets than Arthur Smith last year. But you do wonder if you can trot out Pitts and Hurst at the same time, which one of those is going to be decent enough as a blocker. I think when you look at Hurst, last year he really declined in that department, but 2 years ago he was very good in pass protection. Moving past the, you know, position groups and players and kind of looking at Atlanta's offense from a general perspective, there has been some buy-in from pro bettors because they believe the coaching staff has upgraded big time on both sides. And really bigger than that, there's got to be some positive regression, which you hinted at, because Atlanta did fall 3.5 games below their win projection last year. It was actually the 3rd largest Pythag discrepancy since the merger 40 plus years ago. Atlanta blew 5 games they were leading in the 4th quarter alone. So that's not normal stuff. And so you've been watching the market shift over the last month or so. And these are some of the reasons why you have seen pro bettors go over 7 wins here. And as we sit here and talk, Todd, it's pretty much a consensus, like 7.7.
Yeah, number has definitely been climbing, and you mentioned it. We know what some of the regression metrics suggest, that the Falcons couldn't be as bad in those late game situations and kind of reinvent what has become synonymous with the Falcons franchise, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. You talk a little bit about the revamped offensive line that bears watching, but you did bring up an interesting point that I wanted to get a follow-up on before we kind of shift gears and look at the defense. Mentioning Arthur Smith's scheme being very similar in some principles to what San Francisco does, where they can kind of take the plug-and-chug approach as it pertains to running backs. Atlanta, of course, doesn't have a battering ram in the form of Derrick Henry that we know has been a key cog for Tennessee the last couple of years. Do you feel Mike Davis, who was signed to that 2-year deal this offseason, can be that back, knowing he comes in off of career highs in scrimmage yards, over 1,000 last year and 8 touchdowns? We're filling in admirably for Christian McCaffrey, but is he quite ready to be that every down back that we saw from Henry, where you always have to respect the run threat?
I think the thing with Mike Davis is he showed that he could be a lead back last year. And he did it in front of another offensive line that had serious questions in the Carolina Panthers. And I think the other element here is he's a substantially better pass catching back than a Derrick Henry. And again, for me, it comes back to more of the scheme, the outside zone scheme, because we've talked about this. Derrick Henry wasn't really thought of much before Arthur Smith came to town. And you go and kind of correlate it to San Francisco, and it's like Tevin Coleman, it's Raheem Mostert. It just doesn't matter the guy's name, plug and play. You know, now it's Trey Sermon, that's all the rave. It just doesn't seem to matter who the running back is. This outside zone scheme doesn't ask a lot of the running back. It's hit the hole quick, make one cut, and get upfield. And so I think Mike Davis is going to excel in that, and he's certainly going to be a little bit better of a pass-catching option than what Arthur Smith dealt with last season.
Hey, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, we know Calvin Ridley is a true bona fide number one. I think one of the more interesting statistical anomalies you saw last season, when Calvin Ridley went for 100-plus yards, the Falcons compiled an 0-8 straight-up record in those games, clearly having to play from behind the 8 ball. We'll see if they can use him consistently enough, allow him to achieve the stats that'll translate to wins. Meanwhile, on the other side, if Arthur Smith starts to get a little bit of deja vu, you can understand completely why that'll be the case, because he takes over a defense that was on the same level as the Tennessee Titans a season ago. In comes Dean Pease as the defensive coordinator, and he's got his work cut out for him. When you look at what Atlanta did on this side of the ball, they allowed a franchise worst in total yards and passing yards last season, gave up more than 300 yards from scrimmage at 9 out of the 16 games. I mean, they were bottom 3 in a lot of key categories, and when you dig into some of the individual accomplishments, Deion Jones led the group with only 4.5 sacks, while Grady Jarrett may be a disruptor along the defensive line. It doesn't feel on the surface, Payne, that there are a ton of difference makers at any of the 3 levels for this team defensively.
I would agree with that. Now, again, goes back to scheme. Dan Quinn's gone, who, my God, what, have you watched Hard Knocks yet?
I've watched the first episode. I'm behind. I do have to watch a second episode. It's on the docket for tonight on Monday, so I don't fall too far behind in the series.
You hate to be judgmental, but you watch 2 episodes of Hard Knocks, and you can see why that guy failed. He looks like Steve Buscemi from 30 Rock with the backwards hats, like, hello, fellow kids. It's like one of the more embarrassing coaches you could have represent your organization. It is like so forced and so embarrassing to watch. I cannot believe Atlanta hired Dan Quinn and then basically took that long to fire him. I mean, it was just unbelievable. Now, I do think Dean Pease is an upgrade. Obviously, buddies with Arthur Smith, and he's won a Super Bowl. 8 of 12 years, Pease has been a DC. His units finished top 10 in scoring defense. 6 of those 12 years, top 10 in defensive efficiency. So the resume's there. And if you listen to his presser when he was first hired, Pease basically said, expect a lot of heat. Right? He's going to do whatever is necessary to disrupt the quarterback and offenses. He's going to blitz every position, safeties, linebackers, corner, everybody. He said he didn't want the offense to know where it was coming from, and it's going to come from everywhere. So it's really interesting, but you're spot on. The talent perspective with Atlanta's defense, it's not the best group, But what is interesting to me is, you have a handful of guys that all seem poised for a little bit of a bounce back or a surge type of season. You go and get Daron Harmon, who was one of the very best cover safeties in 2019. He allowed a 33 passer rating when targeted that season. Then he gets traded to Detroit in 2020 and kind of gets caught in the lion's abyss. And then you had Dante Fowler Jr. And when we talked about last year, and I think this was probably I think it was dead on balls accurate, but it was kind of harsh at the time. But we talk about treating teams and players like stocks, and Fowler was the perfect example last year. And I said on the preview podcast that Atlanta made one of the worst signings in years with Fowler. And sure enough, Fowler had his worst season as a pro. But now I'm buying Fowler's stock at the bottom because he's coming off his worst season ever, and his ego's been hit a little bit because Atlanta make him, I believe, it was like either $7 or $8 million in a pay cut. And then they voided the last year of his deal. So Fowler's now a free agent in 2022. So it becomes a contract year for a guy that wants one more substantial deal. So I'm kind of buying Fowler there on the low. A.J. Terrell in year 2, I think there's a surge there. He was thrown into the deep end of the pool as a rookie. He got picked on virtually every game, but he kind of proved he could swim. He had the second best WAR among first-year corners, led the league in outside passing stops as well. Marlon Davidson in year 2 has been all the rave in camp so far, had a great first preseason game against the Titans. So, again, this isn't like the most talented unit, but you have 4, 5, 6 guys that are going to be relied on to contribute, and the stock arrows all seem to be pointing up on each of them. You also have a schedule of offenses that goes from the most difficult in 2020 to fringe bottom 10. A schedule of projected pass offenses and third down offenses projected to be bottom 5. And so you combine those things with a new voice, a defense that's a little bit more fun, and it allows a stud like Deion Jones to be more versatile. And I think you could see a unit that maybe overachieves compared to its talent. And I think you hit it perfectly. It's like, Deion Jones only had like 4.5 sacks last year. Well, he's constantly in coverage. So I think he's going to feast this year when you can get him after the quarterback and kind of unleash him and allow him to do things that he might actually enjoy. Okay, so if you told me somehow Atlanta got to be a middling defense this year, I wouldn't argue with you. Now, what is interesting, because we want to look at every side of the coin, and we mentioned kind of how pros have hit the Falcons over 7, and now it's 7.7. I don't think that means you blindly chase the steam and get the worst of the number, because there are things that don't bode extremely well. I mean, Atlanta plays 10 road games this year. You have the odd number of games, so the NFC teams play 1 extra road game this year, plus Atlanta's got the London game. Atlanta also will have the second most net miles traveled. So I think that's interesting from this perspective. But I do think it's a team that's closer to its Pythag number from a year ago than what they actually put in the win-loss column. I truly believe that. So I think if you said, hey, this is, a 7-8 win team, maybe if, the ball bounces their way and, they get field goal luck and fumble luck and, there's some extreme variance on third down and red zones, can you eke out a winning season? Maybe. But I do think this is a team that plays closer to that Pythag number than the actual wins they had last year, Todd.
And when you mention Atlanta, I mean, this team's got to get off to a fast start. It's imperative. When you look at their first 5 weeks, with a road game against Tampa in week 2, the other 4 games very winnable. Home against Philadelphia to kick things off. They'll go to the Giants for week 3. They'll get a home game against the Washington football team. And you mentioned it. They'll travel to London to take on the Jets in one of our lovely early kickoffs at 9:30 Eastern before they get the bye in week 6. So Atlanta's got to come out of those first 5 weeks with a winning record, whether it's 3-2 or 4-1. Will go a long way in determining how successful they can be in achieving their win total. One last thing I wanted to ask you about, Payne, and it's not going to impact the Falcons right out of the gates, but they did suffer a big injury, relatively speaking, in their preseason loss against the Miami Dolphins. You had A.J. McCarron go down with a torn ACL. The Falcons very much now going to be in the market for a backup quarterback. I don't think Felipe Franks is ready for that. If you're in the GM chair, who are you calling to try and acquire? More speculative, obviously, than information-based here.
I have no idea. Anyone not named A.J. McCarron, I don't think he was very good. So I don't see that as being a loss at all. And if you are going to a backup quarterback, the season's probably lost from that perspective anyways. I I have been very unimpressed with A.J. McCarron, and I'm shocked that he's actually survived in the league this long, because any opportunity that he's had hasn't really done overly well with it. I mean, it hasn't been even outstanding in the short stints during preseason work that he's got, not just this year, but in past years as well. So I've never gotten the A.J. McCarron hype at all.
Always an opportunity to give Josh Rosen another soft landing spot if that's the direction they want to go.
That's interesting. That is interesting. But you think his vibe plays well in Atlanta?
Oh, I think Josh Rosen may be better suited for a career in the CFL at this point than he is to get another NFL job. So no, I don't think Rosen will be an optimal fit there. But it'll be interesting to see what direction they go, because I saw enough of Felipe Franks that while his legs are a great weapon, I would not trust him to throw a pass in the National Football League in his rookie season.
Can I ask a question there? Did you watch Felipe Franks this week?
I saw highlight packages. I have not seen the game in its entirety.
Who's responsible for getting that guy a jersey that fits?
Now you're taking shots at equipment managers around these parts?
I mean, it's just like baggy. It's like old school. It's like the jersey Earl Campbell used to wear when he was running for the Oilers. It's just like big and baggy. It's so bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, that thing for a quarterback that's a run-first option has to be skin tight, and you got to be able to grease it up with a little bit of Vaseline to try and create extra elusiveness for a guy like Felipe. Because if you keep him in the pocket, it's not going to end well. But I did like the fact that he was praised for extending plays, aka not being able to read a defense. But we'll get into that at a later date if he ever takes over and takes meaningful snaps. To another quarterback that people have a lot of questions about for different reasons, that, of course, in Charlotte, where the Carolina Panthers are plus 950 at FanDuel Sportsbook to win the NFC South. Their win total sits at 7.5. You have to lay $1.20 to go under the total. Rebuilding phase enters year 2 under Matt Rule. And while it's not an apples-to-apples comparison, I do think it's worth mentioning that when you look at the trajectory that Rule created at Temple, first season there in Philadelphia, 2-10, second season 500, third season they hit their stride, went 10-4. Rule in his reclamation project in Waco, first season 1-11, second season right around 500, 7-6 with a bowl win, and in year 3, the Bears ended up going 11-3. Carolina last season, Payne, after a 3-2 start, lost 9 of their final 11 games, 12 games under 500 as a franchise since they lost to the Broncos in the Super Bowl, 1-5 in the division, and the finishing kick that they'll see for this season's schedule does them no favors. But in comes Sam Darnold trying to resurrect his career in the second year of the Joe Brady experience on the offensive side. Do you think Carolina made the right move trading for Darnold and extending him even before he took a single snap wearing the turquoise and black or whatever the hell their color is, powder blue? I'm not even sure what you call it for Carolina.
I think Darnold's obviously the big question, but I do want to start with Brady because I think he showed his worth last season. And, he took an offense that was 27th in efficiency before he got there and improved it to 17th with a middling quarterback and the most valuable weapon in Christian McCaffrey only playing 3 games. There has been some slander this offseason from Teddy Bridgewater after he was traded. And I'm sure some of that is because his feelings were hurt about having an opportunity to be a franchise quarterback and them not thinking he was good enough. And he had a previous relationship with Joe Brady and some of those guys, and I think he thought he wasn't treated as well. But Bridgewater, if you've kind of listened to the claims, it was that Carolina never worked on situational offense, red zone situations, 2-minute drill, things of that nature. Now, I'm sure the truth lies somewhere in the middle of those things not being worked on enough to Teddy's liking or never being worked on. Carolina did struggle in that area of the field. You could actually see Carolina's efficiency decline the further they moved the ball. Carolina was 27th in red zone efficiency, so that has to improve. Bridgewater was the 3rd worst red zone quarterback among qualifiers. Completion rate dipped 12% in the red zone. Now, Carolina's offense and how it's created under Brady might be reason for some of that because it's an offense that's kind of built on creating space and finding holes, and that doesn't necessarily translate when you operate in shrunken space. And we know Teddy didn't have the strongest arm, and he's the check down king, and those attributes don't really play well in confined space either. Let's see if McCaffrey back and a schedule of red zone defenses projected to be bottom 5, and Sam Darnold help improve that area for Carolina, but it's something to certainly watch. Now, as for Darnold, I think we're all just playing the wait-and-see game. Nobody actually knows. I'm sure there's a bunch of hot takes, right? And, if it pans out and the hot take was like he's going to be the greatest quarterback ever, we'll hear about it. And if someone says he's the worst quarterback ever and he fails miserably, we'll hear about that too. But I don't think anyone actually knows. And I think a lot of Darnold's failures are on Adam Gase. But some of the questions we had in Sam Darnold's final year at USC, we still have in, year 3 or 4 in the NFL. And regardless of how poorly coached you are, you can't make the same mistakes at 24 that you were making at 20. So I don't know. I mean, even if you are being put in a position to fail, some of your ability has to flash from time to time. And I'm not just talking about a random 30-second highlight a team account posts on their social media channel to get fans hyped up.
Teams don't do that, Payne. They only share clips that are actually true, the same way beat writers only tell you the full story.
So, I don't know what redeemable quality Sam Darnold as a football player has shown. He's been the least accurate qualifying quarterback the last 3 seasons combined. He is very inaccurate on intermediate throws. He was the only quarterback last season to have a negative EPA in intermediate throws. I don't know what an offense that caters to Sam Darnold's strengths actually would look like. Now, we have Ryan Tannehill as an example, right? His career flourished once he left Adam Gase. So I think that's probably the hope you're having as a Carolina fan. But what's really interesting is everything you hear out of Carolina's camp right now makes it sound like Darnold's been neutered. It's nothing but dink and dunk, and Sam's not pushing the ball downfield. Every time Matt Rule's asked about Darnold, he keeps saying, he took care of the football today and gave us a chance, right? He kept it out of harm's way, didn't make the big mistake. Something to that effect basically comes out of Rule's mouth every day. It sounds like Rule just wants a game manager. He wants Darnold to get it out on time. Doesn't really want him to push the ball downfield, and maybe that's just a byproduct of the offense. Only 28% of Carolina's passes last year with Teddy were greater than 10 yards. It doesn't sound like that's going to change, even though the GM makes it sound like the reason they brought in Darnold was because they wanted a little bit more vertical of an offense. And, you kind of look at camp and an off season. That's kind of when you want to work on these things, And you look at the receiver construction with Robbie Anderson and now Terrace Marshall, those are deep ball guys. And so, if you're not pushing the ball downfield now, when are you going to do that? Terrace Marshall appears to be the steal of the draft. He has been all the hype, all the rave. We know it's a tough transition for rookie receivers, just learning the game, but he knows Joe Brady's system. So I think his transition in the league is a little bit different than most receivers. But, we're looking at a team right now that's trying to get things figured out. And Darnold's played, is it 1 series so far in preseason?
Well, we can even go further there, not just to pick on Carolina and the way they're handling a new quarterback. I feel it's a disturbing trend that we're seeing across the league, from young head coaches not playing guys that are new to the system or haven't accomplished much during the course of 1 full season or 2 seasons max. And I kind of shot you a text on that over the weekend. I said, hey, if Matt LaFleur doesn't want to play Aaron Rodgers, that's entirely his prerogative. Aaron should tell you when he wants to play and everything else. But you look at Andy Reid, who puts Patrick Mahomes out there for a series and a half. I don't think Patrick Mahomes has to learn anything nuance-wise about what Kansas City wants to do offensively, but I look everywhere else in the league and nobody's playing, whether it's Justin Herbert as a member of the Chargers, whether it's Sam Darnold in Carolina. Now, I know Matt Rule said his starters will play an entire half this week against Pittsburgh, but at the same time, let these guys go out there and get some of the reps so they can get on the same page as their weapons, and also allow the offensive line to hear their cadence and everything else that makes you successful, coming out of the gates, especially with a Carolina team that has to win their season opener in the Sam Darnold revenge game.
It definitely needs to be a case-by-case situation. And I was, watching the Jets game over the weekend, and they interviewed Aaron Rodgers, and someone asked Aaron's like, hey, all your counterparts like Brady and Mahomes, they're getting some reps in the preseason. And he's like, man, I love LaFleur. I don't want to play in the preseason. But a situation like this is completely different. Now, we also were discussing, how teams would treat the preseason. And there really hasn't been a consensus with this new 3-game preseason slate where you also have that 4th week completely off now. Teams probably that haven't been playing their guys are going to treat this 3rd game like the normal preseason tune-up. So it'll be interesting to see Sam Darnold get out there for a full half, and let's see what it looks like this coming week. But, the reality for me is Sam Darnold in a best-case situation is probably a middling quarterback, and the Panthers don't really have the overall talent, and they certainly don't have the depth to make much noise with a middling quarterback. I mean, I'm not a Teddy B guy, but it didn't make a ton of sense to give up assets when you're at this point of a rebuild and not know the move you were making was 100% an upgraded quarterback. I mean, Darnold has no excuses right now. I mean, he has the OC and DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson and CMC and Terrence Marshall. I mean, weapons galore. Now, Carolina is projected to face a top 5 schedule of defenses overall and passing defenses. The O-line, which has some questions, they project to face the 2nd toughest schedule of pass rushes. There's just too much unknown for me to have a really strong stance on where Carolina's offense is this year. But, I kind of get blinded by Joe Brady and the actual weapons outside because those are top notch. And then when you can add CMC into the fold, it's really interesting. But what is shocking me a little bit is if you've heard some of the camp reports, it's the guys outside are having trouble creating separation, which is bizarre to me when you think about, Robbie Anderson, DJ Moore, Terrence Marshall receiving core. But, Joe Brady and those weapons along with CMC, it's really tough to have a poor offense. I really want to see what this looks like. But ultimately, I think if Carolina's taking that next step offensively from 17th in total efficiency, it's going to be because Sam Darnold is at least an average quarterback. And if he's not, then there's probably not going to be much improvement offensively this year.
Yeah, then Carolina has to begin looking for answers through the draft or in a variety of other ways to figure out exactly what they have. Now, defensively for the Carolina Panthers, a very young group, and Steve Smith had some interesting comments talking about a guy in Jermaine Carter at 26 who has the potential to be the leader of the defense. I don't think anybody's going to compare him to Luke Kuechly anytime soon. But when you look at some of the young difference makers that they have, Brian Burns and Jeremy Chin arguably exceeded expectations a season ago. This group struggled to get off the field on 3rd downs, allowed almost a 50% conversion rate, slightly better than the Tennessee Titans. But when you look at a scoring defense standpoint, they were 4 points per game better than what they were a year ago. And you look at some of their additions. Hassan Reddick comes in, very familiar with Matt Rule during their time at Temple. AJ Boye to help bolster the secondary. They used the 8th overall pick on J.C. Horn and bring in a veteran in Denzel Perryman, who I think can plug some gaps there. We'll see what you get from a productivity standpoint. But what kind of expectations should we have for Carolina when it comes to their stop unit?
I think signs are pointing to an uptick in defensive production. Year 2 in a system, the first full off season Phil Snow gets with his guys. I think Matt Rule came out and said something to the effect of, so far we've eliminated the, hey, I thought this, I thought that type stuff from a season ago, right? Guys actually know what they're doing at this point, and they didn't last year. And guys are doing their job and trusting their teammates to do theirs. That's basically the synopsis of camp so far from a defensive perspective from the lens of Matt Rule. The first 8 picks of this regime were all defense, 7 last year, and then J.C. Horn with the 8th pick this year. A lot of those guys are going to make year 2 leaps. You mentioned Brian Burns. I mean, he proved last year that he can be a top-tier pass rusher. I mean, in his second year, he finished 18th in pressure rate, 4th in pass rush win rate. Aside from the guys drafted that are expected to make leaps and contribute this season, there were a couple value signings that you kind of mentioned. And, you have that reunion with Matt Rule and Hassan Reddick from their Temple days. He was a top 30 pressure rate guy last season. Daquan Jones has been a plus interior lineman. He's coming over from Tennessee. AJ Bouye was signed on the cheap for $3.5 million. That looks like a great move now, regardless of production, because Troy Pride tore his ACL. But if Bouye returns to form, this could be one of the best value signings this offseason. I mean, in 16, he was the third best cover corner. In 17, he was sixth best. In 2018, he was top 20. The entire Jags defense kind of lost their way in 2019. They just didn't like the coaching staff and basically quit. And then Fangio and him didn't get along last season, and he missed some time with a suspension. So, I mean, it's an interesting unit. You have young guys likely surging and gaining some familiarity, sprinkled in with some vets on prove-it deals. And then the final ingredient here to the improvement is schedule. Carolina projects to face a bottom third of the league schedule in terms of overall offenses and passing offenses. And when we talk about Brian Burns continuing to prove that he's this elite pass rusher, I think you're also hoping the guy across from him this year in Gross Matos can take that year 2 leap. And then Carolina is projected to face a bottom 5 schedule of pass protecting O-lines. So it's like, it's time to get after the quarterback here a little bit. The schedule of situational offenses with red zone and third down project to decrease as well, which is huge because you hit on their struggles last season getting off the field on third down. So that's a big area to look for improvement, and you could probably see it with that schedule decreasing. Really, you look at this schedule overall of quarterbacks that Carolina faces in terms of where they stand and what they've proven to be thus far. It's like week 1, rookie Zach Wilson. Saints haven't named a starter yet. Tyrod Taylor. Dak, who hasn't played a game since week 5 of last year and won't get a single rep with live bullets this offseason. Jalen Hurts, Cousins, Daniel Jones. That's the first 7 weeks of the season. If you look at 2020 QBR ratings, Carolina plays 3 quarterbacks this season that finished top 13 in QBR last year. That's it. 4 total games. And when you look at the schedule, when Carolina plays the Buccaneers, they play Tampa week 16 and 18. Is Tampa going to have the conference wrapped up by then and the Panthers might not even see Brady week 18? So all signs are pointing to improvement for Carolina's defense, not just because of the parts they have, but some of the situations with schedule as well, Todd.
Well, no doubt if Carolina is going to see an uptick in overall performance, it's going to come at the expense of a couple other teams in the division. 2 teams left to go, and it does serve as the perfect time to remind you guys to follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at BetTheBoardPod. Go to FanDuel.com/BetTheBoard. All new signups, plenty of aggressive bonuses there to help you build your bankroll just in time for football season. Take full advantage of FanDuel's extensive NFL wagering menu along with a variety of other options. The New Orleans Saints, Payne, second favorites in the division, plus 330 at FanDuel Sportsbook to finish atop the division. Their win total, 9, shaded to the under at minus $1.30. Fancy that, given what we disclosed with them a few weeks ago on this very podcast. And when you look at this team overall, Payne, we know about the figurehead, the alpha male in the locker room, the leader in Drew Brees electing to retire. You mentioned and referenced the quarterback battle. Sean Payton, as we go into the second preseason game, has not yet named a week 1 starting quarterback between Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill. But when you look at this Saints team, this will be the first season for New Orleans without Drew Brees under center going all the way back to 2005. This franchise has won 49 football games the last 4 years, most by any team in the National Football League. They were the only team to rank top 5 in scoring offense and scoring defense in 2020. They went unblemished against the division, the first time they've gone undefeated against division mates in the franchise's history. And when you look at their schedule, I guess theoretically it starts off relatively manageable, but still plenty of questions about New Orleans and what life after Drew Brees is going to look like, knowing that this defense has lost a few difference makers as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of uncertainty on offense, especially when you have, question marks at quarterback and wide receiver, 2 of the most valuable positions on a team. But I think we do have to give Sean Payton the benefit of the doubt because there is this clear baseline of production and really a standard that he's set. And I had a chance the other day to really dig into this, and I thought it was worth mentioning because I was stunned how good this offense has been and how consistent it's been for 15 seasons. I mean, as soon as Sean Payton got to New Orleans, this is now 15 complete years where the offense has never finished worse than 11th in efficiency. And over that 15-year stretch, the average efficiency rank is 6th. So, when you have Sean Payton pulling the strings and you have an elite offensive line still and a weapon like Alvin Kamara, I don't think we're looking at a below-average unit here. I really don't. Now, it could be wrong. And stylistically, it's going to be tough to gauge because we have to still see if Sean Payton's going to trust Jameis Winston, and allow him to throw as much as he did Brees, right? And allow him to throw as much on early downs. Because if you remove the fourth quarters of the Saints, they've been the 6th most pass-happy first down offense in the NFL the last 5 seasons. Are they going to keep that up with Jameis, or are they just going to rely on a top 5 O-line in Kamara and make things more manageable maybe for Jameis on third down? My guess is Sean Payton's going to try to figure this out by feel. If Jameis is like rocking and taking care of the ball, I wouldn't expect much of a change. Expect like a high pass rate on first down and early downs. If not, things are probably going to change. But that first down aggressiveness has been vital for the Saints because it's led them to being in really favorable third down distances over that same 5-year window. And, I look at Jameis and he's clearly capable, right? I mean, he knows where the ball needs to go. And he's probably going to put more zip on it than even Brees ever could. I don't think he's like some slouch. He can sling it. 2 seasons where he's finished top 10 in EPA. And the interesting element here, kind of the bonus, we'll call it. It's like he decided to get LASIK this offseason to fix blurry vision. And so can you imagine if that's all this thing takes? I mean, people in Tampa are going to be like, oh, my God.
I mean, it worked it worked for Rick Vaughn when he got glasses. He all of a sudden found the strike zone and it helped spark the Indians winning the division. Yeah,
I mean, this is hilarious to me, but Jameis is going around telling people he can see street signs finally. It's like the scene from Seinfeld. I was spotting those raccoons. They were mailboxes, you idiot. I didn't have the heart to tell you. I mean, so we've seen Jameis squint for years, especially if you're a Florida State fan. It's and we thought it was some kind of uncontrollable mannerism, but apparently not. And so far in camp, Jameis has been the better quarterback. There is a fella by the name of Luke Johnson of the New Orleans Advocate. He's basically been charting every single throw both Taysom and Jameis has made so far this camp. Jameis has gone 146 for 220 with 9 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Taysom Hill's gone 134 for 205 with 4 touchdowns and 6 picks. So the tide is fully shifting towards Jameis being the starting quarterback here. And I think he's going to have great game plans devised for him. He's got, again, this O-line in front of him that finished top 10 in both pass block win rate and run block win rate, which is huge because Jameis has struggled under pressure, hasn't recorded an above-average season-long grade when pressured. 37% of his picks have come under pressure, but this is far and away the best O-line he'll play behind. He also gets a nice break with the schedule. Saints are projected to face a bottom third of the league pass defense schedule. And the one thing that's really interesting here, and, kind of a general thought here, but it does have a specific offensive element to it, and it does point to regression. There was a study done about team performance the year after a Hall of Fame quarterback retires. And Drew Brees is obviously a first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback. The last 11 times this has happened, teams win on average of 4.4 games less the following year. So something to think about, and it's why we've seen, pro bettors really attack this under 9.5. And when you look today, you're pretty much a market consensus of 8.8 wins when you factor in the VIG. So it's something to think about. And I just, it's very difficult to see what this offense can be without, true number ones. We're hearing all the rave about, Callaway and him being a bona fide number one like receiver, and, Michael Thomas will be back. And those are some large leaps of faith right now as both those situations appear to be in their current state. So, I think we're going to see regression. The question is, how far is the dip?
Do you think we see Michael Thomas take another snap at wide receiver as a member of the New Orleans Saints, or do you think his days down there in the Big Easy are officially done?
I think one thing is very clear, and it's he is not returning until he is 101% healthy. He's not trusting this medical staff who had him play out there and basically tell him, hey, it's not that serious of an injury. We'll just get you rehabbed up and you'll be out there in time to contribute for our Super Bowl run, Drew Brees' last run. And it required off-season surgery. So my feeling is he isn't coming back for a while. And who knows if that relationship can stand the test of time with him not producing on the field. Eventually, if this guy isn't contributing and he's sending out tweets and liking tweets that are not team friendly, at some point, you just got to rid yourself of that situation. And so, to me, there is a possibility that he never plays for the Saints again. We'll see, though.
And I think it's always more difficult, too, when you have a player that's been described as having a mercurial personality. It's a lot easier when you have a consummate leader in the form of Drew Brees that commands the locker room. It's always a little bit more perilous if you're going to bring him back into the fold and you have two guys that are vying for the leadership role with the starting quarterback position. You don't have that calming influence. It'll be a storyline that bears watching, not only from a wins and losses and a season outlook standpoint, but, of course, for a lot of you loyal listeners out there as you look to compile your fantasy rosters and identify other talents. Marquez Callaway could potentially be the guy that benefits with a huge bump if Michael Thomas doesn't return. Defensively, when we look at this Saints team, they were number 2 in defensive efficiency last year. They produced the number 1 scoring defense in the league over the final 9 weeks of the season. They led the NFL in takeaways and quarterback rating allowed during that stretch. First time since 2013, they finished top 5 in total defense and scoring defense for the same season. When you look at Trey Hendrickson, they're going to have to replace his sack numbers. You'll obviously need more production out of Cam Jordan, who saw his sack numbers fall from 12 plus in 3 previous seasons to just 7.5 a year ago. In comes Peyton Turner and Pete Werner, both through the draft, but you do lose some veterans and a long list of them in Trey Hendrickson, the aforementioned Malcolm Brown, Quan Alexander, Janoris Jenkins, Sheldon Rankins, and of course Alex Anzalone. New Orleans, Payne, they've long been thought about as an offensive first team. We've seen that narrative kind of shift over the last couple of years. What kind of performance should we anticipate from a defense who's got to replace a couple key contributors?
They just need to be healthy on the defensive side of the ball. That's the only way that they can survive this season, because you mentioned the slew of guys that are not going to be back this year that really diminish the depth area of this defense. You lose Sheldon Rankins and Malcolm Brown and Trey Hendrickson, and I'm not sure how they can overcome some of the depth issues. Now, the front line talent is still damn good, but the other aspect of this unit is the best guys are getting up there in age as well. Cam Jordan and Demario Davis are 32. Malcolm Jenkins turns 34 before the season's over. Cam Jordan had his lowest disruption rate since 2016. Malcolm Jenkins had his worst season since 2012. And then you have the rumors that are starting to swirl about why the Saints moved or tried to move up in the draft to get a corner, and it's because Marshawn Lattimore is still facing, some legal trouble over this firearm. So who knows what's going to come of that. And kind of sticking with the secondary here, you wonder if Dennis Allen is willing to self-scout this offseason and make adjustments. And I understand that Dennis Allen's been the reason for the defensive improvement for the Saints organization, and that unit kind of loves getting in your face and playing man and intimidating you, especially in front of a packed house in that dome. But the Saints defense was the best in the league when they played zone coverage last year, yet New Orleans played the highest rate of man in the league. Opponent efficiency increased 42% against man. So if Dennis Allen doesn't have the horses in the back, especially if Lattimore somehow misses time, he's got to think about more zone usage. The weakest part of this team defensively was coverage last year. And we know how vital that is in today's game. So, the Saints right now are going to face an above-average schedule of offenses and a top 10 schedule of passing offenses. There's a huge jump up in the run schedule as well, going from bottom 5 to above average this year. The D-line, still very stout. If David Onyemata can have another dominant season and Cam Jordan doesn't regress even further, and, you can get Davenport to somehow play more than 50% of snaps and contribute like a first-round talent, then maybe there isn't going to be, a huge drop-off. But I think that's a lot to ask from those three guys. The other thing that's worth mentioning here, Todd, is I envision the Saints defense being put in worse positions than they have been in recent years.
100%.
If you look since 2017, the Saints defense has had top 5 starting field position, meaning its opponents start backed up. When you have Drew Brees and his 1.2% interception rate the last 4 seasons, and you're transitioning to Jameis, who's above 3.5% for his career, I'd bet large sums of money the Saints defensive unit is put in far worse positions than it has been. And obviously starting field position is huge. It's vital for offenses. If you're backed up, OC's playbooks basically get cut in half. And that's just the reality of the situation. So something to think about when you're gauging the Saints defensively this year is, 1, it's a very thin unit. 2, a lot of the key guys are getting up there in age. And 3, I think they're going to be put in far worse field position than they have been and been accustomed to the last handful of years.
And with all those questions, of course, swirling around the Saints, it makes sense why you have a prohibitive division favorite in the form of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who will seek to defend last year's Lombardi Trophy to become only the second team to repeat as Super Bowl champions since the Patriots did so in 2003-2004, when, looky, Tom Brady was also the starting quarterback there. When you look at Tampa, this was a franchise Payne before last season synonymous with futility. We'll get to that in a second. Their odds to win the division, minus a $1.85 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Their over-under for win total sits at 11.5. You do have to lay $1.50 to go over. And Tampa, credit to some of the folks at Fox for digging up this little nugget. Before they won the Super Bowl last year, they had the lowest winning percentage of any American pro sports franchise, less than 39% success rate. Not exactly a ringing endorsement for everything we've seen. Now, they still haven't won a division title since 2007, but they'll be the first team in the modern cap era to return all 22 starters. The good for Tampa last year, they were extremely fortunate. When it came to games lost, they lost 25 games due to injury, which doesn't include COVID-19 issues or anything like that. Every other team in the league lost at least 41 games. The average number by NFL standards was in the 70s. Legitimate concerns should be out there for how this team looks as far as depth is concerned and what would happen if they had a few major injuries. But continuity at coordinator with Byron Leftwich as OC and Todd Bowles as the DC. And clearly the rich get richer, knowing that Tom Brady had an entire offseason to get that much better with a lot of the same skill position talents.
Yeah, it's really tough because I think the easy thing to do is look at the Bucs and claim that they had lots of fortune, especially down the stretch. And then you see Tom Brady turn 44 this month. And then you look, Tampa is the second favorite to win the Super Bowl. And you just kind of want to be contrarian, fade away. But what's interesting to me is if Tom can regroup the troops here and get everyone to buy back in and not be complacent and have a bunch of guys who've never won before in their life kind of sell them on like, let's do this again, then there's a lot of meat left on the bone. I mean, this was a team that pieced together lots of new parts in a shortened offseason. Guys were not on the same page at all for the first 12 weeks. I mean, coaches and players weren't on the same page. Tom and some of his teammates weren't. And if you remember, Tom and Bruce weren't seeing things eye to eye. I mean, there had been jabs thrown at each other in the pressers. Back in November, you could find articles and videos where the 3 and 4 letter networks were saying Brady and Arians can't stay together. Like this is going to be a 1-year thing. And even though there were, lots of streakiness and variance to the Buccaneers through 12 weeks when they were 7-5, we still had Tampa power rated in the top 5. I believe Football Outsiders at the time still had them top 3 in DVOA. And so there were flashes of some brilliance there. They just couldn't put it all together. And all of a sudden, that Week 13 bye, I think, really saved the day. And if you remember, Tom and Bruce were supposed to have that golf outing meeting, but then the NFL caught wind and nixed it. So Brady and Bruce spent virtually the entire week at the office coming together and devising things that were best for the team. And Bruce let his guard down and allowed the offense to be restructured. And Tom was no longer playing in Bruce Arians' system after the bye, but Bruce and Byron Leftwich were catering their offense to Tom. And so you saw through 12 weeks, the Buccaneers only used play action on roughly 18% of dropbacks. It was the second lowest rate in the league. Arians has never really enjoyed using it, and he kind of voiced that the first 12 weeks of the year. And Arians hated using motion because he thought it hindered some of their blocking philosophies. And it was just nonsense. But Tom loved that stuff. And it allowed Tom to identify whether the defense was playing man or zone. And motion typically forces your opponent to come out of hiding, so to speak. And so even though Tampa wasn't really using those things, play action and motion, the first 12 weeks, when they were, Tampa was second in yards per play when using play action, third in yards per play when using motion. And whether it was Tony Romo blasting Arians during that Week 12 Chiefs game, or Tom was somehow able to get through to Bruce during those bye-week meetings, everything changed. The last month of the year post-bye, play action increased 7%, motion increased 10%. No team the final month averaged more yards on play action or motion over that stretch than the Bucs. In the playoffs alone, Brady's play action rate was 29%, and he delivered a 138 passer rating. His passer rating on any other throw that didn't include play action in the postseason was 74. And you go specific to the Super Bowl against Kansas City, over 50% of Brady's dropbacks used play action. Roughly 75% of plays had a motion element to them. And I say all that because a team that wasn't getting along, a team that was still figuring each other out, a team that was basically not doing anything to enhance themselves or be the best version of them, still managed to win the Super Bowl. It's what if Tampa builds on what they finally figured out with a full offseason? And I think that's important from the onset because Tampa's offense really, when you look at the schedule, is the unit of the team that is going to bear the brunt of the schedule. We're projecting a top 5 schedule of defenses faced, a top 10 schedule of passing defenses, and a big improvement in situational defenses faced. So, you're going to want to see those things that allowed them to reel off 8 straight wins in a Super Bowl victory to kind of be right from the start, right? We're going to use motion. We're going to use play action. We're going to allow Tom to do the things that he likes doing best. And we're just going to, improve our continuity just because we're finally getting more snaps together now with all the same pieces. And I think that'll be interesting to see. So I'm not running to fade Tampa and be overly contrarian here.
It's always interesting because we've obviously never seen a quarterback with the longevity of Tom Brady accomplish as much as he has in his illustrious career. And we talk all the time, as guys get up there in years, you wonder when they fall off a cliff. I think a lot of us thought we were seeing that in his demise in New England. Clearly, that wasn't the case with his resurrection last year in Tampa. And there's no reason to believe that suddenly Tom Brady will fail to achieve some of the goals that he sets out to when you talk about the things you did, about how much better this offense looked down the stretch than what we saw earlier in the season. And it's no coincidence over those 8 straight wins, 22-4 touchdown interception ratio, a passer rating of 112, and more than 4,600 yards passing and 40 touchdowns en route to his 7th championship ring. When you look at Tampa, though, on the defensive side, this is where it gets a little bit scary as well, because for as well as the offense performed, the difference-making unit in the Super Bowl against Patrick Mahomes and company was clearly what Todd Bowles drew up. They were the third team in NFL history not to allow a touchdown in the Super Bowl. Ironically enough, the second straight appearance for Tom Brady, where his defense did not surrender a touchdown. They trimmed 6 points per game off their defensive numbers in the season before. Back-to-back, they've now led the league in rushing defense, fewest yards per carries, and touchdowns allowed on the ground. So if you beat them, it's got to be over the top. But you know what, Payne? That doesn't get all that much easier when you consider the fact that you had 4 tremendous guys when it came to generating a pass rush, and Shaq Barrett and Ndamukong Suh, Jason Pierre-Paul, and of course Devin White, all doing so from different levels of the defense. We talked last season about Tampa having questions in the secondary. I think some of those were answered to a certain extent, but let's be honest and not sugarcoat it. When you generate as much pressure up front, it makes life significantly easier for the guys in the back.
So we can be quick on this side of the ball because my voice is dying, but also there's only varying degrees of what this defense is going to be, and it's either great, damn good, or elite. And I think that's ultimately what the Buccaneers are vying for, not just to be the best defense this season, but in a long time, if you've heard some of the quotes coming out of that camp. And what's really interesting is, we kind of mentioned the secondary. And it was a story I was saying last year in this preview about how the young corners were being taught by Tom Brady. And it was something back in the day that the San Francisco defense was being taught by Joe Montana. And you listen to some of these young guys in the secondary, and they love Bowles. But they said a lot of their growth has come from Tom Brady teaching them. And this was the youngest secondary in the league last year, and they finished 5th in defensive pass efficiency. And it's this whole iron sharpens iron. When you're going against a plus O-line, Tom Brady, Goodwin, AB, and Mike Evans, practice is going to be harder than the game. That's just kind of the reality of this situation. And so when I look at Tampa this year, this has the potential to be the very best defense in the league. You go out and add Joe Tryon, who is just lighting the world on fire. So tack on another pass rusher to the fold here. And then you look at the schedule, Todd. Projected to face a bottom 10 schedule of offenses overall.
Oh, it's sorry.
And in pass protection, a bottom 5 schedule of passing offenses and third down offenses. And so the Bucs are just going to get out there and eat defensively. I think we're going to see this unit take another step up. A lot of the key contributors, like a Devin White, and again, going back to the secondary being one of the youngest in the league, they're all continuing to grow. And it's been this perfect mesh of kind of what we said last year of veterans trying to still prove themselves, and then a bunch of young guys who are only continuing to get better each day. And it's been a really great combination. It just comes down to the buy-in now, right? Guys that haven't won in the past, can you get them to rebuy back in and say, hey, this isn't just a one-off thing. We want this to continue, and we go back to back. But the talent on this side is just absolutely incredible. You have that perfect mix of vets. You have Vita Vea, who, knock on wood, hopefully plays the entire season. We know he missed the early part of last year. So, there are parts of this defense that you can say are improved. And when you have an improved defense that's playing a dramatically decreased schedule compared to what they faced last season, Tampa really has a chance to just overwhelm and dominate on the defensive side this year.
Yeah, much like you, I have no expectations of a death wish here where I want to try and go out there and play hero ball looking to bet against Tampa week in, week out, or anything along those lines. Clearly, this team is poised to do big things this year. We'll see if the injury luck can hold up, the offense can continue to improve, and a defense that's absolutely loaded at every level can be as dominant as they look on paper going into the season. Again, remind you guys to follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. Want to thank him for soldiering on as the voice gets into the 2-minute drill, and we get ready to take knees on what will be the 6th preseason podcast as far as the National Football League is concerned and wrapping up. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Payne, before we get out of Dodge, as it pertains to the NFC South and a variety of other topics, Do you see any investing opportunities? I know we talked about one of these teams and suggested a win total a few weeks back. No, I'm not going to remind new listeners what that may be. That's why you have all the podcasts. Go back. They're timestamps. You can find out what those win totals are. The number may not be available at this point, but it is what it is. Just wanted to check before we close up shop today, take a little 3-day break, and come back strong with 2 final divisions before the season inches closer.
I don't have anything at the moment, unfortunately. I mean, there was a couple of things in college that we were going to figure out if we were going to fire on early this week, which we haven't done yet. So I do want to at least make sure that we're invested in those before asking people to put up their hard-earned money. And the preseason stuff is not widely available at this moment. So nothing today, unfortunately, as a best bet, but we'll definitely have something on Thursday.
You mentioned preseason stuff widely available. It's always fun on a Monday morning as we sit here and record a podcast for, let's call it a shade more than an hour. 5-point moves here, moves through supposed key numbers here and there. It is an interesting market. It continues to grow and evolve, oftentimes frustrating us to no end. But again, a different discussion for a very different day. Want to wish everyone the best of luck as they continue to do their deep dives and prepare. Go back, listen to all the other divisions. We've now covered the South, the East, the North, all 5 power conferences in college football as we get close to week 1, where we'll have our debut regular season podcast next Wednesday. But in the meantime, regardless of where your investments take you, hopefully we'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.